This is Land of Havilah, Psalm 66. It's 20 verses. We'll read it all, then comment. Verse 1. For the chief musician, a song, a psalm. Make a joyful shout to God, all the earth. Sing to the glory of his name. Offer glory and praise. Tell God how awesome are your deeds. Through the greatness of your power, your enemies submit themselves to you. All the earth will worship you and will sing to you. They'll sing to your name, Selah. Come and see God's deeds, awesome work on behalf of the children of men. He turned the sea into dry land. They went through the river on foot. There we rejoiced in him. He rules by his might forever. His eyes watch the nations. Don't let the rebellious rise up against him, Selah. Praise our God, you peoples. Make the sound of his praise heard, who preserves our life among the living and doesn't allow our feet to be moved. For you, God, have tested us. You have refined us as silver is refined. You brought us into prison. You laid a burden on our backs. You allowed men to ride over our heads. We went through fire and through water, but you brought us to the place of abundance. I'll come into your temple with burnt offerings. I'll pay my vows to you, which my lips promised and my mouth spoke when I was in distress. I'll offer to you burnt offerings of fat animals with the offering of rams. I'll offer bulls with goats, Selah. Come and hear, all you who fear God. I'll declare what he's done for my soul. I cried to him with my mouth. He was extolled with my tongue. If I cherished sin in my heart, the Lord wouldn't have listened. But most certainly God has listened. He's heard the voice of my prayer. Blessed be God who's not turned away my prayer nor his loving kindness from me. Comment, the King James Version of verse 1 says, Make a joyful noise unto God, all ye lands. It's the source of the one-liner that even if we can't sing, we can make a joyful noise. In verse 4, all the earth will worship you and will sing to you. They'll sing to your name. Someone unfamiliar with the Bible might think that's an empty statement, that all the earth will worship him. But the Bible makes no empty statements. In the future, according to prophecy, at a time when Jerusalem's under siege, the Lord will return in glory, destroy some of the people of the nations who opposed him, and everyone left on earth will worship him. From Zechariah 14:16, quote, And it shall come to pass that everyone that's left of all the nations which came against Jerusalem shall even go up from year to year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, end quote. In verse 5, come and see God's deeds, awesome work on behalf of the children of men. Accordingly, God's deeds in the next verse were for the benefit of man, such as making dry land appear during creation and drying up the Jordan River so the Israelites could cross it. God has man in mind when he does his awesome deeds. In verse 7, don't let the rebellious rise up against him. If we were naive, we could take that as a command that we should intervene whenever and wherever someone rebels against God. But that's not the intent. For example, when Herod put John the Baptist in prison, during the thick of Jesus' ministry, Jesus let it happen. He didn't intervene. So we don't oppose every rebellious act, but we do fight the battles God gives us. The command, don't let the rebellious rise up against him, is rather a command to the rebellious that they shouldn't rebel. In verse 8, make the sound of his praise heard. It goes right along with making a joyful noise in verse 1, coming before him with singing in verse 2, offering glory and praise in verse 2. And line after line in this psalm stated various ways that we should be vocal praising and recognizing God. It's not that he's fishing for compliments, or that he's insecure and needs us to build him up, or self-centered that he needs his ego fed. Praise helps us because we so quickly forget God's capabilities. In verse 9, he doesn't allow our feet to be moved. If we find ourselves moved and unsettled, praise is the beginning of resetting ourselves. In verse 10, for you, God, have tested us. You've refined us as silver is refined, end quote. From the New Testament, God puts us to grief in various trials that the proof of our faith, tested in fire, may result in his praise, 1 Peter 1, 6 and 7. In other words, when we pass difficult tests, it reflects well on God that he's built up our character. He refines us as silver is refined. He makes us something more glorious than what we started. In verse 12, you allowed men to ride over our heads, meaning God allowed the Egyptians to enslave them, but he brought them out to a place of abundance, as the verse says. In verses 13 to 15, when the psalmist was in distress, he made some vows to God with his mouth and lips, something to the effect that, God, if you get me out of this jam, I'll do such and such for you. It turned out in verse 15 that he vowed to make some animal offerings. He says, in effect, I fully expect to offer those animals because I know you'll answer my prayer. In verse 18, if I cherished sin in my heart, the Lord wouldn't have listened. From the New Testament quote, we know that God doesn't listen to sinners, but if someone's God-fearing and does his will, he listens to him. John 9:31. Blessed be God in the last verse. Psalm 67 is next.